Hi there, and welcome to another Learning How to Make Cards card making process video. And I preface it by saying learning to make cards just as a way of indicating that this video is probably going to be quite a bit longer than most card making process videos because I am learning card design as I go, and I'm including all of my mistakes in my complete process, so I don't have everything all figured out and then put it together while you guys are watching. It's more like I'm showing my entire process of how I'm growing. Hopefully, I've got my fingers crossed here, hopefully growing into more of a card maker by just making more cards. I think I just have to get down to it and start making cards. And so one of the things that I'm doing is I am scrap lifting cards, which means I am taking a card as a jumping off point for inspiration that I can, many times my plan is going to be to actually copy a card very, very closely, making very few changes to it in order to learn the design principles from the experts. And so I have this card here from the designer is actually Nicole Gavaldon, and this was on the Fawn blog, and it's a really cute card with that features the Fawn reveal wheel die set, and I have that die set and the stamp set, and so I wanted to use this as my jumping off point. Now, I did earlier in the week ask my tiaras over on Patreon, those are my supporters over on Patreon, to give me some ideas of different cards that I could use to scrap lift and learn card making. Basically, my thought was that the way that I became really comfortable and confident in scrapbooking was way back in the day before I started making videos. I scrap lifted a bunch of pages, and in doing so, I learned things that I would have never learned if I hadn't actually just gone through the process of trying to recreate some pages. And so I wanted to do that with card making. I thought maybe that is the key to getting a feel for how things work together on a smaller space. And so I would like to scrap lift 10 cards, and some of them I might make my own and kind of modify them, and some of them I might stay really, really close to the original designer's design, and I'll probably change out the stamp sets and that sort of thing because I don't have all of the Fawn stamp sets, but I am using the Fawn blog as inspiration, and I had asked my patrons to choose a few cards from the Fawn blog for me to try to practice with, and this was the first one. It was suggested by Natalia, and she was wondering if I could, she didn't know if I had the die set or not, but she was wondering if I could give this one a try. I do have the die set, so I'm going to give it a try. And what I thought I would do is cut my die front out of mixed media paper, because this card has a watercolored front on it. Like the background has a sky and grass that looks like it's created with watercolor. So I'm starting by cutting my card front out of this reveal wheel die set. And I'm also picking out some Critters in the Burbs, which is an older Fawn stamp set that I really adore. I'm grabbing some scraps to die cut some of these, and I'm actually going to make a couple of mistakes along the way, and I'm going to leave all of those mistakes in, so I'll let you know when I make mistakes so that you can kind of perk up and maybe pay attention and not make the same mistakes that I did. So I wanted a brown for the tree trunk. I'm going to basically paper piece the tree. I want green for the leaves and brown for the tree trunk. So you saw me going through my scraps there. Those were my Stampin' Up scraps. And I ended up going into a full piece of cardstock. This is Lucky Limeade green cardstock from Stampin' Up. And I am changing this card right from the outset, and I'm actually making it quite a bit more complicated than it really ought to be for your first time using this die. What I really should have done is just made a basic reveal wheel card and then stepped it up a notch with this fancier version. But that's not what I wanted to do, so here I am, and I'm going to learn all the ins and outs of using the reveal wheel die, and also learn all the ins and outs of my crazy idea that I need to kind of make a bunch of mistakes before I get it right. So what I thought I would do is have this die cut tree on the front of my card. So I'm die cutting it with green, and I'm also die cutting my reveal wheel with green, because when I have a window, so I want the tree to overlay the window so that you see green in the window and the tree will be over top of it. And you'll see what I mean in a few minutes. So I am going to start, well, so what I learned there is that I needed to start by stamping, which I already knew, but I just kind of forgot. So I needed to start by stamping my tree. So I stamped my tree, and I'm doing a tone-on-tone stamping. So this is Lucky Limeade ink stamped onto Lucky Limeade paper. And I'm just using my Misty tool. This is the smaller Misty. It's just a stamp positioning tool. And I'm using Early Espresso on, I think it's probably Early Espresso cardstock as well, which is a dark brown by Stampin' Up. I have tons of Stampin' Up colors, so this is, they're great to have. It's great to have lots of different colors on hand for these sorts of projects, because you never know when you're going to need a certain color. So I'm just going to run that through my die cut. So that first one was a mistake. So this is the die cut tree that I'm going to use. And then I'm just die cutting the trunk here. I don't need the whole tree. So there we go. So now I have a stamped and die cut image, and kind of 1.5 of them because I restamped and die cut the trunk. I'm trying to put things away as I go so I don't accidentally throw away any of my dies. And I am going to want to cut out the little centerpiece. So first I am just die cutting this, just the trunk part, so that I can kind of layer the two. And now I've decided to cut out that little center of the tree. I really wish that this die would cut that center out, because it looks quite a bit better. The tree looks quite a bit better with the center cut out like that. So I just hand cut it as you saw. And then I also cut into the tree trunk as well. And there is another way to do that, and I will show you after I make this card. I'm going to want to perfect the card, so I'm actually going to make this card twice, which is part of why this video is quite a bit longer than most card making process videos. So now I'm just, as you see, cutting out the card front. So this is the card front that will have the window on it. And now I need my reveal window to kind of go over my tree as well. So now I'm just going to run it through with the tree alone. And that's going to give me a tree with a hole that perfectly lines up with the hole in the front of the card. Can you see where I'm going with this yet? I know I didn't explain it very well, but hopefully as you keep watching, you will see what I plan to do here. So I will layer the tree on top of the card front so that the holes are lined up, and then I'll layer that trunk on top of the tree. And I just cut the other piece of the reveal wheel. That white piece is something that you're not going to see. It just helps the wheel to work better. And I'm going to put away my die cut machine. And you see that I have some distress ink out there. That is Mermaid Lagoon, which I'm going to use in a few minutes. First, I'm just using some Tombow Mono Aqua glue, which is a good glue for gluing paper to paper. And I'm just going to overlap the tree trunk with the tree. So it looks like it's paper pieced. It is paper pieced, just with the trunk on top of the tree instead of the tree on top of the trunk, which might have made better sense, but it's okay. Now I have, this is an MFT cloud stencil, and I'm just taking some of that distress ink. Again, the color is Mermaid Lagoon, and I'm going to layer a whole bunch of these clouds across the front of my card. And you see that I'm just spinning it as I go so that I get an interesting combination of different clouds. And I'm starting my like I'm not pouncing, but I'm kind of swirling and blending the ink onto the page. I'm actually starting on the stencil. That way my darkest ink is on the stencil and not on the paper, so that by the time I make my way over to the edge of the paper, some of the ink is off of my blender and I get a nice soft look that way, and I don't get an obvious dark spot where I came onto the paper with the fresh ink on the blending tool. Just had to pick out some of my sentiments. I need 4 sentiments across this wheel, and I was thinking about using vellum there, but I'm not going to. I just had to pick a little brad from my stash, and this is what will hold the wheel mechanism together. So you take the little white piece and you just layer it with the wheel, and then I'm going to cut my Stampin' Up! Dimensional adhesive in half. These are the larger pieces, like the regular sized dimensional adhesive, and I cut them in half, and they will just take up the space that the brad head takes up, so that this whole thing will lie flat. I'm actually not going to assemble it quite yet. First, I'm going to take it apart. What am I doing here? I have to figure it out because I don't know exactly what I'm doing. So one of the things that I forgot was to make a background that the whole thing will sit upon. So I need one of these that doesn't actually have a reveal wheel hole cut into it. So this is the backing upon which my other cutout piece will sit. So I have a foundation piece, I have a piece with a window and some clouds on it. You're not going to see any of the foundation piece. It's just going to hold the wheel in place and allow it to spin. So there it is. And I followed the Lawn Fawn website instructions for this. And basically I'm just moving the wheel around so that I can't see the embossed lines. So there are like these really faint embossed lines. You can see the curvy one that goes all the way around the wheel, and you just need it to not be showing through either the window or that little half circle cutout where you put your finger to spin the wheel. Now I took the cutouts, like the offcuts from the die cuts, and I'm using those as my template to create like some space for where my sentiments are going to go, basically so that I know where I'm supposed to be stamping my sentiments on this wheel, because this is the wheel, like these are where the sentiments are going to go so that they show up in the little hole. So I just use my powder tool to dust that off so that no stray embossing powder will stick anywhere other than where my Versamark ink went. And so Versamark is just a sticky glue in an ink pad that you can stamp on, and you see that as you heat it, you sprinkle the embossing powder over top, and then as you heat it, it melts and makes this really very bright, beautiful, shiny surface that has this sentiment on it. So I stamped amazing, I stamped fabulous, and I'm just stamping and embossing as I go, as opposed to stamping the whole thing and then trying to emboss the whole thing. I just felt like I was more likely to get my finger stuck in, like to accidentally make a mess and stick my finger in the wet embossing stuff before I was able to get a chance to actually emboss it. So I'm just going slow and doing one at a time just to make sure that I don't make any mistakes. So there we go. There we go. Now I have a wheel that has all of my 4 sentiments on it. And that was pretty easy. It looked more complicated on the Lawn Fawn YouTube videos than it actually was. So it's actually pretty good. There are some little gaps in that embossed circle around the outside of the wheel, and you can use those to line up and center your sentiments and make sure that they're evenly spaced. So now I have to put this whole thing together. And I'm going to make a mistake here, which is I'm going to put all of these dimensional adhesive pieces all over this before I have put the wheel on. And so if I do this, my wheel may not turn properly. In fact, if I took off the backing of all of these, my wheel definitely wouldn't turn because my wheel would be stuck to the dimensional adhesive. So here I'm realizing, wait a minute, I can't do that. I mean, I could just leave them there and just not put... What I mean is I could leave them there and not remove the adhesive backing pieces off of them. But what I've decided to do is actually I stopped the camera and took off that adhesive the foam adhesive under where the wheel is, and here it is already off, and I'm reattaching the wheel. I did that because I was a little bit afraid that the backing that covers the adhesive on that foam adhesive, I was worried that as you spun the wheel that maybe the backing would start to come off and the wheel would get sticky and wouldn't spin as well. So I thought better to just prevent a problem from happening by just removing that adhesive. So the only foam adhesive that was left was the stuff that you just saw there. So now I'm just positioning where my sentiment is going to go, or the first part of my sentiment is going to go. I have my Misty tool out again. That's just a stamp positioning platform. And I'm stamping Have a Really. And then I use Tombow Mono Aqua glue to glue my tree in place. There you go. Oh, sorry about my head there. So see, it spins, it works really well. I'm totally pleased with it. I adore this. And so you can really see why the foam is needed now. Basically, the foam holds the space between the two layers of that outer shape with the notch out of it to allow the spinny wheel to be able to spin freely. So I don't want this tree to look like it's floating in the middle of a sky, so I have to come up with some type of an idea for how to put a ground here. And so I have these stitched hillside borders, and I really love them. And I thought about maybe putting a treed border, but the scale of those trees, obviously those trees are supposed to be way off in the distance. And if I were to use this border, I would tuck it behind the bottom part of the tree so that the tree would be kind of like sitting on a hill, and then the border of the tree line would appear like it's way off in the distance. But I didn't know if I could really pull off that look. I didn't think it would look very realistic, and it might just look kind of weird. So I decided to just go with some hills. I'm really antsy to use all these beautiful dies, so I keep pulling them out. And I thought about using a grassy border as well, but I decided to just go with the hills, just the way they are, just the stitched hills. And so I went into my scraps, my green scraps, and I grabbed a green. I just wanted something that was not the same green as the tree, and I'm going to cut both of these stitched hillside borders together. And one thing that out of the same piece of paper, because they're going to be overlapping, you're not going to see the bottom edge of them. And so what I've learned about these dies is that you have to be mindful of where the stitches are. And so just pay attention to that. Typically, when I'm cutting two stitched hillsides from one piece of paper, I have to have the two dies facing each other so that you get a stitched hillside at the top and a stitched hillside at the bottom, and then you slice them in half and like right down the middle, and then you have a plain edge on the bottom and a stitched edge on the top. Now I'm just running them through my Big Shot again. Sorry that I forgot to zoom out, but basically my goal here is to get that stitched border on the bottom of each of those hills as well, and also along the edges. So I'm really sorry that I didn't zoom out, but I am going to make this entire card again. Once I figure it out, I have a bit of a smoother process, and I do make even more mistakes the second time, and I build the card a little bit differently the second time too. I didn't film my whole card the second time, but I did film part of it just so that you could see the improvements in the design from the first card to the second card. So here I am just taking my little critters from the stamp set, and I'm playing around with a couple of different places that I can put things. I really like that squirrel. She looks so playful there that I'm just playing around with some different fun places to put her. Like she's kind of hanging out of the tree, chasing after the acorn. And I also have a bunny down there. You can't see, you can just see her ears at the very top. The bunny doesn't end up making it to the tree. But I decided to just go with the cat and the squirrel chasing a nut. It always reminds me of Ice Age, that little squirrel with the nut, even though the squirrel isn't nearly, it's not the same design of like a cartoon character at all, but it still always reminds me of that. So now that I know where I'm going to put all of my critters and which critters I need, I am going to do some stamping on some Copic safe paper. And the paper I'm using is Copic Express It cardstock. And I I had bought a couple of samples of various brands of Copic Safe paper, and when I moved my scrap room, I mixed up some of my papers, and I ended up having non-Copic paper mixed in with my Copic paper, and now I don't know what's what. So I had to just go ahead and buy another package of Copic paper that I knew I could count on actually being Copic Safe paper. So that was a bit of a blunder on my part, but that's okay. It's not that I just got a small package of it because I don't do a ton of Copic coloring. So I am using Memento ink, which is a Copic Safe ink to use. It won't smear or bleed out when you add alcohol markers. And I am stamping 2 of these because I'm already deciding I'm going to make 2 of these cards. Even though so far I've only been making 1, I know that I have figured out some mistakes along the way, and I thought I'm going to want to make this card again. And I will tell you the big thing that I want to change when I get to it, because there's something really bugging me about this card, and I'm curious if it's bugging you too. I'm not going to say what it is yet, but in a little bit you'll either say, yeah, me too, or you'll think, oh, I didn't even notice that. And I'll be curious to hear. So you give me a comment below and let me know if you had noticed that about this card. I'm going to keep you on the edge of your seat in the meantime. So I am just using my Copic hand color chart, which I recently updated. I had an older one and it didn't actually have all the colors on it. And so when I bought a couple of new markers recently, I only bought a handful of new ones just to fill in some colors here and there. Some of my new colors weren't on it, so I had to reprint it and recolor everything, which was kind of nice. Opportunity for me to get in touch with my colors and remember what I have and don't have. I am coloring this cat to look like my kitty cat. This one is going to look like my chocolate point Siamese cat. And so I'm just putting darker color on her points and a cream color on the rest of her body. And then I'm just blending it out. I'm not an expert Copic colorer, but I do enjoy coloring in and blending out my colors a little bit. And so this is not going to look perfect by any stretch of the word, but that is a-okay. It's going to look a lot like my cat, which I'm very pleased with. I love coloring people and animals to look meaningful. And I'm going to do something at the end to this one to make it really look like my cat. My cat has a little chunk out of her ear because when she was a kitten, she actually got stuck in our our ceiling, and she sliced a little chunk out of her ear, the poor little thing, on some ductwork that was in our ceiling. And so I just colored in her nose black, and I'm just doing a little bit more blending. And so at the very end, I'm going to take a little hole punch and take a little notch out of her ear so that she looks just like Nixie. Now the colors I'm using here are E51, E55, 57, and 59. I don't think I'm using 59 on this cat. I think I'm going to use 59 on the other. Yeah, this is E51, E55, and E57. I had it written down. And then for the squirrel, I'm using W1, 3, and 5, which is a warm gray. Just filling in the lightest parts first and adding just the slightest bit of dark around the edges of her. And where she's mostly horizontal, I'm putting the shading on her bottom side, like under her belly and the bottom part of her tail. And of course the foot that's on the back, like the foot that's further from us, is darker as well. And just blending it out a little bit. And now for the acorn, I'm going to use E51, 55, 57, and 59. So I think E51 and 55 are for the smaller parts, and then like for the part I'm doing right now, the lighter parts, I'm sorry. And then for the little cap on the acorn, I'm doing E57 and E59. And I didn't really pay attention to the angle of the acorn when I colored it. So if you were wanting, if that was important to you, I would think about where you want to place it and where you want the shadow to be. I don't really care about the shadows. It looks like the light in my card is coming from 2 different places if you look really carefully, but I don't think it really matters. It's just a card. So I am just doing the exact same coloring with the second squirrel. So no point in reinventing the wheel. This card isn't going to go to the same person. Both cards aren't going to go to the same person. So there's no need to be super creative unless if you're in the mood to do so. And for me, coloring is fun, but at this point I'm really having so much fun putting together the card that I really just want to get these critters colored as quickly as possible and move on to assembly, because that's what I'm really enjoying today. There are other days when I love the coloring and I really take my time, but today I just wanted to get at it. So I start off by coloring this cat almost the same. I'm adding a layer of the lightest color, but actually none of this color is going to remain on this cat. She's going to be quite a bit darker than the other one, because this one is going to be Lila, my seal point Siamese cat, and seal points are quite a bit darker than the chocolate points. So here I am just laying down a darker color on top of that. Changed my mind, but that's okay. One of the great things about alcohol markers is that as long as you're going lighter to darker, it's okay. And now I'm just adding that darker color. So these ones, for this cat, I'm using the same colors. It's just I'm going a little bit darker. So the E51 wasn't really required. I'm doing E55, E57, and E59. And blending out just the same way that I did before. So starting with light, adding the touches in the dark, and then going back to the lighter color to blend it out. And I think I'm going to forget to color her nose, because at some point I'm going to go back and add I think I'm finished coloring by the time I add her nose. So I don't know how I could possibly forget to color her nose, because it's very bright white there. Blending, 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 just trying to make it look like Lila. She's quite dark, so I don't want it to look all, I want to make sure that I keep some differentiation here so that it doesn't look all the same shade of brown. And that's, I think the darker you go, the easier it is to make everything just look the same shade. And so I'm trying to be careful not to do that. Aw, look at that. She looks just like Lila. And one thing to keep in mind about alcohol markers is that as they dry, they do typically lighten up a little bit. So I'm looking at the card right now, and both cats are a little bit lighter than they are in this video. Now I'm taking the coordinating die set, and of course if you don't have the die sets, it's quite an investment to get the stamp sets and the die sets. If you don't have the die sets, you can easily just cut around the stamps that you have. So I'm just using some washi tape to hold those in place, and I use the magnetic platform just because it's simpler for me. It doesn't have like a flappy thing that I have to deal with. I like just I just like the convenience of the magnetic platform, but I do find that my dies scooch around a little bit on the magnetic platform. It's great for using with bigger dies, but with the smaller ones, it's a little bit tricky. So I always use washi tape when I'm using my magnetic platform with these. I don't rely on the magnet to hold them in place. And so there you go, just 2 passes of the Big Shot, and I have all of my shapes colored and cut out for the 2 cards that I'm making today. So now I'm just going to try to figure out where I wanted to place those. And I have a second part of my sentiment that I want to put here, and it's birthday. So have a really awesome, and now I have to figure out where am I going to put birthday? And I thought, I don't really want to stamp it anywhere. It's kind of getting in the way of the design no matter where I put it. So I have these, which are scripty sentiments, and this one says, happy birthday to you. And it's a die, and it has the word birthday. So I am going to cut this out of black cardstock, and you'll see that the black cardstock isn't long enough to fit the whole sentiment, but that's okay because all I want is the word birthday. And so I'm just using my tiny little die cut machine, and I just tap it a little bit on something hard and it releases. There are little holes that you can poke if it's really stubborn, but I find just giving it a quick tap will release the paper out of an elaborate die some of the time, not all of the time, but it's worth a try. So I just cut off the to you and happy, and there we go. I have a really amazing and then birthday. I'm going to use Tombow Mono Multi adhesive here because this has a chance of coming off, and I really don't want it to. And so I want it to be really stuck really well. I can see that I'm going to be kind of overlapping the window a little bit, so I want to make sure that it's really stuck there. And Tombow Mono Multi adhesive is a very, very strong adhesive. It's a good adhesive to use on cards because they take more handling than a scrapbook page does, and you don't want things falling off of your card as people are enjoying them and having a look at them. My second layer of hill will have some dimension to it, and I'm just being careful when I pull off one of those little pieces of foam adhesive. The one that my thumb is on right now, I'm not taking the adhesive off of because my squirrel is going to layer under there and I don't want to interfere with that. There's Nixie. She's in the field. She's an outdoor cat, or she's an indoor cat, so I think the idea of Nixie being in a field is very, very unusual. She would probably like that. Now, what I really is annoying me that I alluded to earlier is the fact that that spinny wheel over on the right-hand side, the part that you actually spin with your hand, is green. I really wish that it was white. So I'm in this dilemma where I want the sentiment background to be green, but I want the spinny wheel that you turn to be white. So I'm going to come up with a two-tone spinny wheel solution to this reveal wheel die. But first, I'm going to finish off this card. I already know how I'm going to do it, but I just have to finish off this card first. And I thought about matting the whole thing on this piece of patterned paper. It picks up, I just like the addition of a nice color there, of pink in particular. But then I thought, no, I think I like it better just white. So I'm going to mount it on my card base just the way it is. And I like how that looks. I like it quite a lot. So now this time I'm using my Tim Holtz stamp positioning tool. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm stamping directly on the card base, I need to be able to extend my card. See that extra part of the extra flap, the back part of the card? That needs a place to go, and I don't want it to bend. So this stamp positioner has two open sides, so you can put as big of a piece of paper in it as you want. It doesn't have those bumpers all the way around it. They're only on two sides. So that frees me up. I do have a lot of stamp positioning tools. I'm not entirely sure why I have so many, but I do. And it's always nice to have the perfect tool, but you really don't need multiple of the same tool. I have a YouTube channel and I like to compare and contrast and try out everything on the market so that I just sometimes I get asked what I recommend, and so I like to try things out. So that's why I have multiple trimmers and multiple tools sometimes, die cut machines and so on. But you don't need all this stuff to make cards or to have fun scrapbooking. All you need are a few supplies, and I try to always remember to say that. Okay, so this card was looking a little boring, so I pulled out a couple of more shapes here that I wanted to include, and I thought just adding the tire swing to the tree just makes it look a little bit more interesting. It adds some energy to the scene. It's kind of like you can imagine children swinging on that swing even though they're not in the card. I'm going to use the same piece of Copic paper here rather than cutting up another piece. There's plenty of room on this for two more things. So because I'm making two cards, I'm going to clean those stamps and stamp them right here. There you go. One thing that is really handy to have multiple stamp positioners for is if you're making an assembly line of a whole bunch of cards, and you can have all of your stamps sorted out and placed on each platform, and then just kind of move along and ink stamp, and go from one platform to the other, if you do have the luxury of having multiple platforms. I just grabbed some more Copic markers here. These are C4, 6, and 8. And so these are not a warm gray. These are a neutral gray. And so there they are. And I'm just going to color in the tire, adding my lightest color of gray first, and then tire swings are almost always darker on the bottom because that's where the shadow usually is. And I'll also put some dark on the inside there as well. Oh, I think I'm going all the way around the outside, but I will be heavier handed towards the bottom and lighter handed towards the top. Although looking at these two tires right now, one of them became so dark that you can't even really see the shading anymore. And like I said, when you're going with darker colors, that's one of the risks, is that you kind of lose the shading if you're too heavy-handed with the dark. But that's okay. Nobody notices these things. The person who gets your card is going to be so impressed that you handmade a card for them, because handmade cards are such a rarity these days that people are going to like your card no matter what. That one is a little bit, I don't love how that one is colored, but like I said, it's okay. It doesn't matter. You get that it's a tire swing, and that's all that really matters. So having been heavy-handed on the first one, I will try to be a little bit less so on this one, but I still want it to look like a tire, like it should be black looking. And I typically use grays instead of blacks because black is just going to look like a blob. It has no dimension at all. So I'd rather go from grays to such a dark gray that you get the feeling that it's black as opposed to a true black. So I'm using blue for this bird. I'm starting with B00, and then I'm using B02 by the look of it. Yeah. And then I'll even go in and add a little bit of B05. And the bird is really cute. Such a simple little shape, and is so cute. I like just the little detail of adding the bird in the sky. So there we go. I wasn't sure if I was going to include the Copic coloring. I thought about cutting it out because it's not the most riveting part of card making, but I thought I'd leave it in just because I am trying to show my entire process, and that's sort of what I do in scrapbooking too, is I leave in even the boring stuff, and if nothing else, it gives you something to look at, and I can sometimes catch up on other aspects of my narration while I do it. So cutting those both out, and I like that the tire center is cut on this die. Run that through as well. And if you're using washi tape, just make sure that you're careful with pulling it off, that you don't tear a layer of your coloring after spending all that time coloring it in. You don't want to rip it. So I'm using my Tombow Mono Multi to attach the swing, and I'm just pulling up the branches a little, like the green part a little bit, to tuck the string from, or the rope from the tire underneath of the tree, and just added the bird up in the sky. And putting the bird over there on that side balances off with the tire swing on the other side, and also draws your attention to the fact that there is a spinny wheel. So I'm just giving you a bit of a close-up of the stamp set. So this is Critters in the Burb. I have the stamps and I have the dies. I know this is a funny place to put the products, but here it is. Then this one is called Reveal Wheel Sentiments, and I used the little spinny arrow and also the sentiments from that. Have a really, and then Amazing, Terrific, Super Magical. So I love the mix and match aspect of this set, and I also use the Turn Me stamp right here. And then on the flip side, this is the Reveal Wheel die set. And I also have some extra pieces there. I have the speech bubble and something else. Yeah, just the speech bubble. Oh, and the ice cream. And then this is Happy Birthday border, and I just use the birthday from it. I keep a sample so that I can see what they look like. And then these are the stitched hillside borders. I used scraps for this, except I did cut into a piece of Lucky Limeade paper, and I used this mixed media paper, which has a nice smooth surface, but it's really good for blending inks and whatnot. So whenever I'm doing ink blending, I try to use that paper. Various scraps here as well. Now I'm going to make a whole other card using the pieces that I already cut and colored, making the first card, and this is going to be my improved version of the card that I just made. So I'm starting off, I'm learning from my mistakes in some cases, sometimes I'm repeating them, but I'm learning from my mistakes by remembering to stamp this image before I die cut it. So I did Early Espresso ink on Early Espresso cardstock, I think it's Early Espresso, and then I'm doing Lucky Limeade ink on Lucky Limeade cardstock, and these are all Stampin' Up inks and papers. And I didn't bother even inking the whole stamp because I'm going to piece these two things together. And I'm going to piece them together differently this time, and I think it made better sense the way that I did it the first time. But anyhow, you can choose. This just goes to show that there's more than one, oh, that's a terrible expression, isn't it? More than one way to skin a cat. Let's not say that. There's more than one way to cut a tree. How about that? So I'm just going to use some tape there, some washi tape to hold that in place. Cut out my green tree. Oops, be careful. Don't. Look, see, I did exactly what I warned you guys not to do, which is to be overly zealous with taking off your tape, and I ended up tearing a little bit of the cardstock for my tree. But luckily I am going to be punching a hole in the center of that tree where my sentiment is going to go. Not punching, but die cutting a hole. And so that really shouldn't matter too much. You might see a tiny bit of it, but that's okay. So I'm using the same little scrap of paper to cut my little piece that I need to make my wheel work. There we go. And when it comes time to make this wheel, I'm going to do something a little bit different. So you remember how I had this dilemma where I wanted the wheel to be white on the edges, but I wanted it to be green in the center where you see through the hole in the tree. So that's what I'm going to try to do this time. I'm starting by cutting my 2 layers of my base. And I'm remembering that I need 2 this time, so I already cut my one that doesn't have a wheel in it, a wheel hole in it. And here I'm going to show you what not to do. So I thought for a second there, for some reason, I thought I did this last time, but I didn't. I just narrated it, so I know that I didn't. But a little bit of time passed between making the first and second card, and I thought I cut it this way, which is both at the exact same time, which really doesn't work. It doesn't work because what it does is it leaves little indents in your tree and in your card base where the layers of paper were overlapping, and the pressure on it just adds little indents, like you get the ghost shape of a tree on your card base, and that's not what I wanted. So it might have covered up, like it might not have made a huge difference, but it was irritating me, so I thought I'm going to do this right and run this through. And just have that cut a lot more smoothly. So that was much better. And why am I doing it twice? Oh, maybe it didn't work as, I can't remember what was wrong with that one, but for some reason I wasn't happy with that either. I think maybe, oh yes, you could see a little bit of the indent from that puzzle piece that you put in. And I think that was just because I didn't have the puzzle piece in there really straight. And so those are things for you to know, I guess, about using this die, is make sure that you have that puzzle piece in there really straight, or it will leave a little bit of an indent in your nice card front. Now, because I had an extra card front that I kind of ruined by, didn't ruin it, but there was a flaw in it, so I just cut my wheel out of that. So now I have a white wheel this time. And there are a couple of different ways that you could make the center of your wheel the same color as the tree. I could have just inked the center only and used those embossed, so there are little embossed marks around the outside edge of that wheel. I could have used that as a guide and kind of used some green ink to make the inside of my wheel green. But what I've decided to do is recut the wheel in green cardstock, and then I will use those little embossed lines that are around the outside edge of the wheel and cut all the way around it so that I have a smaller wheel and that's green, and then the outside wheel is white. So right now it just looks like I have 2 wheels, but I will make it into one at some point. And because this is my second time around with the same card on this process video, I cut out the part where I cut the hills. I did exactly the same thing I did the first time. I did cut a second green tree because for some reason I was unhappy with the first one. I can't remember what it was, but I think it was the indent marks. So I am going to cut the little center part of this tree, which I already mentioned I don't like. So I'm going to cut it out. And I am going to layer these two trees together differently, which is why I am leaving in this part of the process. And I think it's just interesting to know that there are multiple ways. There's no right or wrong way to do something. If you can make it work, then it works. So for some reason, the first time cutting out this little section worked really well, but this time cutting out this little section with scissors was not cool at all. It was very tricky. And so I got out my glass mat and my X-Acto knife and decided to cut it that way because I just have a little bit more control when I do it, although I wasn't pressing hard enough. And so it did take a couple of passes. I don't know why this tree was so tricky this time. I decided to just cut the whole bottom part of the tree off altogether and just layer the leaves on top of the brown cut tree. And it was a little just not very nice looking, so I trimmed it up a little bit more, and then I wanted to extend those lines because most of it has that stamped outline look to it. So I just grabbed the same color marker as the ink that I used to stamp that, and I just added lines around the part that I had just cut out. Now, I don't want the brown to show through, so I had to kind of cut that a little bit. This was definitely not the greatest execution. This was a much more awkward way to layer these pieces together, but whatever works for you, it's fine. So now I have my tree and it fits nicely on my background, and I have my hills, and now I'm just going to use actually I think I decided to stamp my sentiments before I cut out the edges of my tree, so I will do that in exactly the same way that I did on the first card, so I'll cut this part out. So now I've done the embossing and I just erase those lines, those pencil lines, and now I'm just taking my scissors and cutting around exactly where the embossing lines are on this wheel. Then I can layer the green wheel with the sentiments on top of the white wheel, and this way I have the exact same color as the tree in the wheel, and I have the white. Satisfaction. I love how it feels when something works out. So I am taking another little brad, and I'm going to assemble my wheel in the same way that I did before. I am going to leave this part in because this video is almost done, and I think that it's just helpful to see this come together a couple of times because it's a little bit complicated. It's not that complicated, but it's a little bit complicated. So I'm just attaching the wheel there, and you just put it so that the basically the button part of the brad is on the back side, and the little pieces that you pull apart are on the front side of the wheel. And yeah, so you don't really have to assemble it and then reassemble it. You can just stamp your sentiment where you need it to be stamped and then assemble it afterwards, which was something I didn't realize until I did it the second time. So there it's all lined up and it spins very nicely. And now I just have to add some dimensional adhesive in the right place so I don't have to pull it off this time. Lessons learned, right? Fill up any places that I think need some support. And now I'm going to ink my background and make the clouds and put the whole thing together, and this is how it looks. The rest of it happened exactly the same as it did for the other card, so I didn't really include the process, but here we are. And you can see that this card, although it is very different than the inspiration piece, it kind of took on a life of its own, and I really like how it looked, how it turned out. The other thing that I added to this card that isn't on the other one is I added some little stamped grass underneath of the cat, which really helps the cat be anchored and not look so much like she's kind of floating on the edge of a hill there. So that was another, and that little grass stamp just came in the stamp set. And when I put this card down, after I show you the details, you'll be able to see the difference between the two cards. Just subtle differences, but I think it does make a difference. See how this cat looks more like she's kind of floating on the hill? And you'll see that I cut the little chunk out of her ear, just like poor little Nixie. And then I just went back with a marker and outlined it so that it looks like I did it on purpose instead of looking like it had a chunk missing by accident. And this card looks nice enough with the green wheel too. Like there's not anything wrong with the wheel being green. I just, from a design perspective, thought it would look really nice if it was white as a different option. So I'm glad I was able to kind of add that feature to the second card. And it's very possible to make a reveal wheel card like this without having a specific die set. I think that you could piece together different, like a scallop circle shape and different dies and punches in order to make something really similar. It would take a lot of measuring and figuring out. And so I think if you were going to make a lot of reveal wheel cards, I think that this die set is really worthwhile because it makes this card so much fun and so easy to put together. Whereas, although it might be possible to do it without the die set, I think it would be really quite difficult, and sometimes figuring out those sorts of things can be very challenging and rewarding in and of itself. So if you've made a reveal wheel card without the die, I would love to see it. Make sure you tag me on social media if you do that, but also if you're using the die set, I would still love to see your creation. So let me know what you're making. Take care and have a really great scrappy week. And I should probably mention that I do plan to come back to this original card design by Nicole Gavaldon and try out that watercolored background that she used because I really loved that. Take care and have a great scrappy week.